Hey, this is Mark Williams of Swine Like Barbecue. Today I have a beautiful A9 brisket from Kevin Green down at the butcher shop in Pensacola, Florida. He always hand picks them. You can tell it's got a huge flat, great marbling. You know it's going to render down and be awesome on this stick burner. What we're going to do today is just do a light trim to where it'll lay flat and get good airflow around it in the pit. Come back with a little bit of Killer Hogs TX rub, get a good heavy coat on it, and let the smoker do the work. I'm guessing it's going to be about a 7 to 8 hour cook, but we're just going to cook it till it's ready and then get it off and really enjoy this brisket. Let's get started. So the first thing we have to do is get this brisket trimmed. Now I'm not going to take a whole lot off just because I want to cook it in its whole form and get as much of that fat rendered as I can throughout the cook process. But you can tell there's some fat on top of this flat I'm going to have to take off, and we're really just going to shape this brisket up to where it lays flat in the pit. So the first thing we're going to do is kind of expose as much of this meat as we can right here. Just a little bit of silver skin on top of this flat. And all I'm doing is just taking my time. This is a process you don't want to rush through. And this on top of this flat is not the good fat you want to leave on here. It's kind of slimy, it's not going to render. As you can tell, that marbling in this flat is unreal. So some of these A9s have already been trimmed, so they take this large amount of fat right here out, so you're not paying for something you're not going to use. But as you can tell, this flat and point are kind of joined together. I'm going to follow this seam around and get that trimmed out to where it'll lay a little bit flatter. So just take your time. And then once you start kind of getting it separated, you can almost pull it with your hand. Use the tip of your knife. This fat seam separating your point and your flat is pretty thick. You'll render most of it, but it's not going to render it all. That's the reason we're taking just a little bit out. Again, I'm not going to fully separate this like I would at a contest. We're just going to take our time, trim the brisket until we get it the shape we want. Kind of see what we're working with on the fat side. What I am going to do is you can see the point comes around and you can see where it tapers off right here. That's the whole point of this brisket right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off all of this right here just because that point is just full of fat, and this will help you build a little bit better bark. So all we're doing is just looking over the brisket, seeing if we see anything. You can tell the two muscles are good and defined. I'm just going to come down this, square this up. This end of the flat gets pretty thin, so I know that's going to want to flake off and overcook. All I'm going to do is go straight with the grain, get that off. Anywhere you have a sharp edge, you want to take it off. Just kind of round it off to where you don't have a point sticking up. That's a little thin right there, so I'm going to push it down. Cut with the grain. So that's all I'm going to take off. So I know it looks pretty aggressive. It's just how this brisket's formed together. In order to expose as much of this as we can to where we can get a good bark on the outside, I had to take off a little bit more than I would like. What you want to do is when you place this in a pit, you want it to be just like you see here. Keep them all kind of close together where that heat should come up, come right over the top. And now that I'm looking at that, I see these edges here are kind of coming to a point. So what I'm going to do is just kind of taper that off. That way that's not going to be sticking up higher in the pit, and that edge right there is not going to dry out. Now this brisket's ready to be seasoned. So I want to take a few minutes to go over why I trimmed it this way. As you can tell, when we started off, that point was just covered. You couldn't get any rub on that point to really work those flavors with all that marbling. So I tried to expose as much of that point as I can. Same thing with the flat. I wanted to take all this off the top of the flat and get rub on it. Now underneath, we didn't go nearly as aggressive because it's still got a good fat cap on the bottom. Same thing with the flat. At the end of the day, what it boils down to is trim a brisket to your liking, but also trim it to how your pit runs. So I know for a fact when we get out there on that Outlaw, that heat's gonna be coming from this side, it's gonna hit this and should roll right over the top. So I want that brisket almost as aerodynamic as I can. That way we have no high spots to dry out, no high spots to really burn or get dark on you. So it should cook really even as that heat rolls over the top. Now that we got the brisket trimmed, it's time to get some seasoning on it. So today, like I said, we're gonna run the Killer Hogs TX rub. It's just gonna complement this beef really well. We're gonna do the fat side first. So what I like to do is try to start right here. You can move that point, that way you can get a good heavy layer of rub on the bottom of the flat. Man, this rub has a great texture. Like I say, I'm going pretty heavy. This is a big cut of meat. It's got a ton of fat that's gonna render out during the cook. We're shooting for having that perfect bark is what we're going for. Get it flipped over. Same thing this way. You can get this flat out of the way. Get a good heavy layer on this point. That's gonna make some awesome fatty slices. Get that pushed up tight, just like it's gonna cook. And get another layer on this flat. Let me spin it around and let you get that money shot. If that ain't gonna build a bark, I don't know what will. So we'll let this sit on the cutting board while we get the pit fired up, and then it'll be time for it to hit that smoke. So to get this Outlaw hybrid model fired up, we're gonna do the same process we do when we fire up our patio. We're gonna fill the basket up with some good royal oak briquettes, get some tumbleweeds placed in it, get them lit, make sure all your doors are open, and let that oxygen get to this fire. It won't take long, we'll have a good bed of coals rolling, and we'll be ready to start adding some splits. So this Outlaw hybrid come right up to 275. Let's get this brisket on. I'm gonna place it on the smokestack end, and just remember, however you place it in this pit is exactly how it's gonna cook. Get it kind of patted down just in case I have any high spots, I can feel it. And then we'll get the lid closed. So we got the brisket on. I'm gonna make sure we baby this brisket all day long. I'm gonna come out here probably every 45 minutes, look at it, see how it's going, and I'm gonna have me a spritz bottle just with water, spritz any spots I see that are drying out, and of course we'll check on the fire while we're out here. So you can tell our coal bed is maintaining perfectly. I'm gonna go ahead and add a split of this pecan we got from smokerwood.com, get it nestled in them coals, and to bring home that Texas flavor, I got a couple of chunks of some oak. We're gonna place it in there with it. That should incorporate a really good flavor and get the smoke rolling. So it's been a little bit over an hour. I'm gonna go ahead and check on this brisket, see what the color looks like, see if it needs to be spritzed. What I have is 16 ounces, just a bottle of water in a regular spritz bottle. I like using the bottled water because you don't have chlorine or anything like that in it. To me, I don't want chlorine on my brisket. So let's look at it and see how it goes. Looks like we got pretty good color. I'm gonna go ahead and just give it a light spritz while we're in here, just to keep that bark moist, and then get the lid shut. So it's been a little bit over 2 hours into this cook. Let's see what our bark's looking like. You can see the top edge of that flat starting to get a good crust. Right here is. Everything else looks good, color looks good. We'll kind of focus our spritz right there on that high spot. Hit that point back there, front edge. All your edges and corners really where you want to focus on. And that looks good. We'll get the lid shut and keep on cooking. So it's been a little bit over 5 hours. We've been out here about every 45 minutes checking the fire, and of course we'd open it up, check the brisket. We would spray the corners with water just to keep that bark good and moist. It's got great color, it's time to wrap. So let's reach in here and get it out. You can tell we're starting to cook out a little bit. This edge here is what we was trying to keep good and moist. It still looks good. The point's got good color. The bark's set very well on it. It's not coming off on my hand. We're ready to get this brisket wrapped. So let's get it in here. We're gonna get it wrapped in butcher paper and we'll get it back on the pit. So we've brought this brisket in. We've got it placed on this butcher paper, and what I have is two 24-inch sections of your pink butcher paper. I got them double layered just so we get a little bit of extra coverage. What I'm gonna do to wrap it, bring it back toward me, I'm gonna take my first section, wrap over it, tuck it in as tight as I can. Pull it again. So right now it's fat side up. We're gonna go ahead and fold the edges in. Do the same as this. We're back right side up now. The fat side is on the bottom. All I'm gonna do is fold this over, pull it tight some more, and get it tucked in underneath. And if that ain't a little envelope of perfect goodness, I don't know what is. So now we got it wrapped. I'm gonna go ahead and get one of these Thermalwork dots placed in it. Our points at this end and our flats at this end. This is the one we're gonna focus on. So I'm gonna kind of feel, see about where it's at. I'm gonna kind of go in from the side, get in the thickest part of that flat right there, and then we're ready to put right back on the pit. So we're back out at the pit. You can see she's about 158 internal, exactly where you want it at this time in the game. I'm gonna place it back on the pit. Point side again is going toward the fire. Get the lid shut. At this point, all we're doing is maintaining a good fire. We'll keep an eye on the temps. We're gonna take this brisket about 205. I'll come out and check with a thermal pin, see what the texture's like. You want super soft, like room temperature butter. That's what we're shooting for that perfect texture in the end. So our dot's going off at 207. It's been a total of an 8-hour cook. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna slide the probe out and I'm gonna check the tenderness with my thermal pin. Slide that probe out, come right on out. I'm gonna go in the same hole, 207, 208, soft feeling. We're gonna call this baby done. So we'll get it out. Oh yeah, it feels real soft. So we're gonna get it in the house and let it sit on this cutting board. That way the cook process will stop. We'll let it rest for probably an hour to hour and a half. I don't know if I can wait much longer than that. I'm about ready to dive into it. So we brought the brisket in, we let it rest in the butcher paper for about 2 hours. We got it out, of course it made a huge mess, but we got it out on this cutting board, and let me tell you, that bark is phenomenal. I can't wait to dive into it. Just as a quick recap, we started off with a 14-pound A9 Wagyu brisket. We trimmed it just to where it'll lay flat, removed all the excess fat, got a good layer of that TX rub, put it on the pit, let the pit do the work. It was a total of about an 8-hour cook. We ran the pit at 275 the whole time. So let's slice on into it. So the first thing I'm gonna do is separate the flat from the point. And you can see, all you have to do is just pick up the flat, place your knife in that fat seam, and walk it through. And it'll separate just like that. We're gonna set the point off to the side. We'll have the flat here. Of course, the grain is running long ways. You wanna cut across the grain. So what I'm gonna do is just cut the end off right here, start our slices. And we're gonna go about a number 2 pencil thickness. You can go as thick or thin as you like. This is just a standard thickness everybody tries to go for. If it gets a little too tender, hey, don't be scared to go a little bit thicker. As you get further down this flat, it's gonna get more tender because it's up closer, higher to the heat. I can tell now this is getting softer and softer as I go down, so I'm gonna make my slices just a little bit thicker. All right, let's see if we can get a good one in here. I'll try one of these ones right out of the middle. Of course, drapes right over your hand. Pulls right apart, full of moisture. So the moment of truth, we're gonna see if all this hard work paid off. I'm gonna be the first one to tell you, yes it did. That crust on that bark is excellent. So I'm gonna scoop this off to the side, and we're gonna do the fatty slices. And if the lean has got that much moisture in it, I can't wait to see what the fatty side is. So the grain in your point is gonna be opposite of what the flat was. So it was laying on underneath the flat just like that. We're gonna turn it 90 degrees, and then we'll slice across the grain this way. Your slice thickness is gonna be about the same. It's gonna have a lot higher fat content in the point than it does the flat. You can cube this up and do burnt ends and put them back on the pit. I personally like just slicing it and eat it at home. And that right there is awesome. Pulls right apart, super soft. Let's compare the lean to the fatty. That's my cut. I'm a fatty kind of guy. That TX rub adds a great pepper note. Of course, it gives you an excellent crust. That bark is just as good as it gets. I'm gonna have to go back in here and get me one of these lean slices. We'll get one toward this end that's a little bit more done. You see it pulls right apart as well. It rendered probably about 90% of that fat between the point and the flat. You get an excellent smoke flavor. That pecan really shines through. Got an excellent smoke ring. This is one of my favorite cuts to cook and eat. That's a wrap for us today at Swine Life. We appreciate y'all checking this video out. Y'all have to try one of these A9 briskets. They're hands down some of the best beef out there. If y'all got any questions, shoot us a message on Facebook or Instagram. And as always, like and subscribe to the channel. We'll see y'all next time. So it's been an hour.